Here at Queen's Park, the word sweeping often gets overused in describing legislation, but in the case of Bill 5, sweeping is just the word for it. It would give the government unprecedented power to create special economic zones where companies could be exempt from complying with provincial laws. It would scrap Ontario's Endangered Species Act, replacing it with what environmentalists say is a watered-down version. In total, this one bill would amend 7 existing laws and create 2 new ones. There's a lot going on in Bill 5. I'll break it down for you.
We don't need their costs, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their energy, we don't need anything.
Donald Trump is why Premier Doug Ford says Ontario needs this bill.
The people of this province gave us a huge mandate to move forward, to compete against President Trump. He has called an economic war. He wants to take our jobs. He wants to close our businesses.
Trump's tariffs dominated both the provincial election won by Ford's Progressive Conservatives and the federal election won by Mark Carney's Liberals, and both promised to speed up approvals of major resource projects as a way of fighting tariffs.
We can't build Canada into an energy superpower if we can't actually get the shovels into the ground.
Everything is going to go faster. We're going to make sure we cut out the red tape and the regulations and the bureaucracy, and we're going to get shovels in the ground.
Ford's solution for making things happen faster is Bill 5. The single biggest thing the Cabinet gets out of Bill 5 is the power to create special economic zones. No other Canadian province has legislation like this on the books. I asked the government to name some jurisdictions that do. Here's the list they gave me. Bill 5 would give Cabinet the authority to declare any location in Ontario to be a special economic zone. And then Cabinet can give any company or project in that zone exemptions from any provincial law, provincial regulation, or municipal bylaw. What could that mean? Maybe an exemption from the Human Rights Code, no environmental protection laws, no need to comply with workplace safety rules, no limits on noise.
You can call them special economic zones, but what we know you are doing is opening up the floodgates for an abuse of power by government.
I was crystal clear about getting rid of the red tape, getting rid of the regulations, making sure that we attract investments and create the climate and the conditions for companies to come from around the world to invest.
Ford has already signaled 2 projects that could be candidates for special economic zones: the Ring of Fire mining deposit in northern Ontario and the proposed Highway 401 tunnel through Toronto. There would be nothing stopping the government from giving more places this special status, perhaps the massive Volkswagen EV battery plant near St. Thomas, or maybe the proposed Bruce nuclear power plant expansion.
So essentially, the Cabinet could give corporations a free pass to circumvent all sorts of important protections, such as environmental laws, labor laws, health and safety laws, local planning laws, municipal zoning bylaws, and so on and so forth.
Bill 5 doesn't lay out any criteria of how companies or projects would qualify for a special economic zone. It leaves it all up to Cabinet. And it's worth noting that during the election campaign, Ford never mentioned special economic zones as a tactic that he had planned. Bill 5 would repeal Ontario's Endangered Species Act and replace it with an entirely new law called the Species Conservation Act. The government says the current approach to protecting species at risk is too complicated, too slow, and causes unnecessary costs for projects such as housing and highways. Right now in Ontario, an independent scientific committee decides whether a species is endangered or threatened in this province. One of the key changes in Bill 5 would give Cabinet the power to overrule that committee.
It's really hard, I think, for Ontarians to have faith in the process going forward of identifying and classifying endangered species in Ontario if that's now subject to a partisan political process instead of an independent scientific process.
Bill 5 also has a section devoted entirely to mining. The government says it currently takes about 4 years for a new mine to get all necessary provincial approvals. The bill would shorten that timeline to 2 years.
Because we are among the slowest nations on Earth when it comes to mining. We are the 10th out of 10th to attract investment. We are the second slowest in the OECD, the industrialized world.
Mining is worth some $16 billion a year to the provincial economy. Global demand is surging for what are known as critical minerals used in tech, such as cobalt, copper, lithium, and nickel. The Ford government wants to boost production in Ontario. Bill 5 would also greenlight a landfill at the edge of the town of Dresden in southwestern Ontario without an environmental assessment. You might wonder what a landfill has to do with protecting the economy against Donald Trump. Well, the government says it's because 40% of the waste generated by Ontario businesses gets shipped to landfills in the U.S., and the president could stop the flow of trash across the border at any time. The landfill's opponents aren't buying it.
If a massive landfill can be forced on the edge of our town without full environmental review, whose town is next?
The strongest objections to Bill 5 are coming from First Nations leaders.
The path that's underway now under this legislation is the wrong way.
Why are the mining sector's interests being protected over First Nations?
When this bill becomes law, that this will not be the end of our fight, that the fight will only just start, will only begin.
More than a month after introducing the bill, the government added a couple of clauses to say the legislation will be consistent with Indigenous and treaty rights.
That's not good enough. It's a slap in the face when you try to do last-minute changes to appease the First Nations.
Under no circumstances will we compromise treaty rights, Madam Speaker, or the duty to consult. In fact, it will be a sharpened focus with First Nations who've approached us, Madam Speaker, about some of their economic interests.
If the Ford government pushes through with Bill 5, First Nations leaders are warning of the potential for conflict. They're talking of a repeat of the Idle No More protests against Stephen Harper's federal government, which saw blockades of rail lines and highways. Bill 5 could become law by the time the legislature takes its break for the summer in early June. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.